start our recording. Thank you everyone for joining us for this session of the virtual KLA Conference 2020. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Andrew Smith, and he's going to talk with us about everyday advocacy.
Great, thanks so much, Margie. I'm going to minimize that so you're looking at my glorious screen. And I will start. I'll just start out with who am I? I'm Andrew Smith. I'm an associate professor at the School of Library and Information Management at Emporia State, but I also serve as the board chair of Emporia Public Library. And just before I launch into talking about advocacy or everyday advocacy, I should say that my career did not start in libraries. I'm one of these late arrivals to the library world. But my career did start in public service in some ways, and I also ended up doing a lot of advocacy for the arts. So think of an equally neglected and underfunded solution to the world's ills as libraries, and you have the arts. So that's where a lot of my advocacy experience started. I also tend to describe myself, I think, as a sociable recluse. So a lot of the stuff that I'm going to say to you, I don't actually find easy at all. And so I fully understand if you, as particularly traditional librarians, don't find this easy at all. But there's one other thing I'll say to you. A lot of what I'm going to tell you is not new. Your mother could tell you this, but as Dr. Johnson said so many times, we need to be reminded more often than we need to be instructed. And I constantly am reminded of that when I attend sessions. I was just in the impact session before this, which was bringing back to my mind a lot of things that I knew, but that had sort of slipped my mind. So I hope in this session, I'm going to remind you of some things that you know and encourage you to do a little bit more by way of advocacy. Excuse me. So here's where I'm going. I'm going to talk first of all about advocacy. I'm going to contrast what I'm terming everyday advocacy against crisis or just-in-time advocacy. I'm going to say why we need to be advocates. I'm going to talk a little bit about targets of our advocacy, and I'm going to talk about everyday advocacy activities. Excuse me one second. So, what is advocacy? And when you look in the dictionary, you get the helpful, or perhaps not quite so helpful, definitions of advocacy as the act or process of advocating. That's not really very helpful, but of supporting a cause or proposal. And an advocate, one who pleads the cause of another, one who defends or maintains a cause or proposal, or one who supports and promotes the interests of a cause or group. Now, I teach an advocacy course in SLIM, and it's interesting that the very first thing I do in the course is to ask the students what they think advocacy is. And more than half of the definitions that come back to me include some idea of conflict or fighting or stress, battling. And I think I understand where that is coming from. But I think if you look at these definitions and look at the words pleads, defends, maintains, supports, promotes, there's much less of this adversarial idea of advocacy and a lot more of a sort of nurturing approach to advocacy. So that is very much what I want to be suggesting to you today, is this sort of kinder, gentler advocacy, but not something where we are constantly in conflict, but something that is a supporting and a promotion and a bringing together. So crisis advocacy, I would define as frantic pleading, often on short notice, to deflect budget cuts, library closure, or library deprofessionalization. So every time we get the emails from ALA saying, write your senator to save the IMLS, this, I think, is crisis advocacy. It's really cold calling. You're sending emails, letters, making phone calls to people you really don't know. You have no relationships really with the people you're calling, and there's been very little prior education. Now, just-in-time advocacy is slightly different. It's targeted and it's planned to support a specific measure or action. There's a calendar of action leading up to a vote or a decision. For example, a library bond referendum. It may be cold calling, it may not. Again, you're dealing with emails, letters, phone calls, and there may be relationships to the people involved, and there may be prior education, but it's more of a limited time with one particular goal in mind. But what I'm really here, I think, to talk to us today about is what I'm calling everyday advocacy, which is a constant series of actions and interactions promoting the library and library programs. And the emphasis here really is on building relationships and on continuous education. Your goal is really producing new library advocates, and it lays the foundation for just-in-time advocacy projects. I see it as the absolute antithesis of crisis advocacy. But I think this is what we are not doing enough of, so we end up in crisis advocacy. Why advocacy? So I'm starting off with a quote from a rather well-known author. It is a fact universally acknowledged, or unfortunately not, that the majority of people have no idea what a library really is, have no idea what a librarian does, and have no idea the value a library brings to its community. I say this over and over in my advocacy class. I say it in other classes as well. And although my students smile and nod, I think we cannot overestimate the lack of knowledge of people about libraries. If you ask somebody, what is a library? The answers you get will be very much along these lines. It's a building, it's a pretty Carnegie building, and it's full of books. Now, there's nothing wrong with that definition, except that it's focused very much on places and things and not really on the job of a library. Similarly, if I ask people what a librarian does, I'm going to get answers like this. Look and see, these are the archetypal librarians. We all laugh at the Nancy Pearl action figure with genuine shushing motion. I actually don't think that's anything to laugh at. I think the fact that we as a profession allow those conceptualizations of what we do and encourage them is holding us back. And again, a librarian with a big pile of books. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm a great believer in books. I love books. We all understand, and the archivists will tell us, that the best form of information preservation is print it in a nice book on acid-free paper, store it well, and you're good for 500 to 1,000 years. Everything else is very temporary. But then what good is a library? And at the moment we are seeing A lot of people say, oh, well, the library is a community center, therefore it is good. Or we don't really need the library because we have all this wonderful interconnected communication on the internet, or as we've all heard, everything is available on Google. I would like to argue with all of this, but let me see where I'm going to say this. Yeah, okay, I'm coming to this again. Hold that thought on what a library is, what a librarian does, and what good is a library, as we think first of all about our advocacy targets. And I think your advocacy targets are everyone. I think it's external to the library. It is the city and county commission, the people who are funding your library. If you're an academic library, it's the provost, it's the faculty. If you're a school library, it's your principal, it's your superintendent and your teachers. It's your legislators, it's the school board, it's the Chamber of Commerce, it's businesses, it's civic organizations. All those people are your advocacy targets outside the library. Inside the library, you have just as many targets. Your patrons are targets. And I know we have a lot of patrons and they love the library, but most of your patrons would give very similar answers to the question of what is a library, what does a librarian do, and what's the value to the community as the pictures I just presented. Your staff are also advocacy targets, both your professional staff and your support staff. Remember, your support staff haven't been to library school. They haven't been exposed to the same types of information and professional training that you have. I think very often professional library staff are quite shocked when they discover some of the ideas support staff have about the library. Your library board are targets for your advocacy. So many times boards are wonderful, well-meaning people who love the library, but they are not necessarily very much better off understanding-wise than the person in the street who's never been through the doors. And lastly, the friends of the library. Again, wonderful people supporting your library. It does not mean they really understand what's going on. So, as we're thinking about advocacy and advocacy activities, I think the most important thing is being present and being visible at your city council meetings, at the Chamber of Commerce, at the Rotary Club meetings, in leadership groups, in KLA, KASL, CULS. I think now notice the first, all of those first lines are outside your library building. I think this is crucial. As a profession, we have been rather guilty of sitting in the library waiting for people to come to us. Now, it's understandable, but it really doesn't help us spread the message. So we need to be outside the building. I think it's all senior staff. As many senior staff as you can possibly involve is what you want. So your professional librarians, it's probably too much to expect the library director or one person to do everything. But is the library represented at these different meetings? Forge relationships, thinking about your programming. What can you do to do a program in conjunction with somebody else? I'm teaching a class at the moment in multiple literacies in libraries. And one of the things I have to remind my students is we as librarians cannot give health advice. We cannot give financial advice or legal advice or tax advice, but We can partner with people and organizations to do programs where that advice can be provided. We're not qualified, but there are plenty of people in the community who are. How do we set up those relationships? By being there, by seeing people at the Rotary, by seeing people in the leadership Emporia, leadership Wichita, leadership Topeka, whatever the leadership program is, where are those people? How can we involve them in the library on professional grounds where they then begin to develop a better understanding of what the library really is and how they can support it? Now we're moving on to education. Every single interaction you have is a teaching opportunity. So what does the library do? I really want us to be thinking of first principles. The first thing I want you saying about what the library does or what the library is not that the library is a community center. Because folks, let's face it, you can have a really good community center without hiring all these expensive, overeducated librarians. So although we may be a community hub, that is not our major function. The library brings people and information together. That is our number one job. We are an information organization. We are the information hub for our community, whether that be an individual needing specific information about health, about finances, about vacations, whatever it is. If it's businesses looking for help and support, we provide that information. We are a source that brings people and information together. What does a librarian do? Remember, a librarian is a highly trained information specialist, and we are able to guide people to quality information that answers questions or serves information needs. That is what librarians are. It's what librarians do. Now, we do a lot of other things as well. We do a lot of things that are components of that. But the number one thing about librarians, real librarians, is they are highly trained information specialists. We're living in an information world, in an information economy. We do not spend enough time reminding people that the most highly trained information specialists in any community are in the libraries, whether it's a public library, whether it's a school library, whether it's a university or college library. Those are the most highly trained information specialists in your community. We need to remind people that that's who we are. And therefore, we are able to provide services that nobody else can. And then what is the value of a library to its community? Not we are a community center. The value we provide to a community is we help people reach their full potential. We help businesses reach their full potential. We also provide education. We are at the forefront of early literacy. Now, I'm not trying to put down schools, but folks, schools don't start until kindergarten or first grade, by which time the current research is telling us that it's all over if the children have not been exposed to literacy and to live language, not just recorded stuff, not the TV, not the computer, live language. They need their parents talking to them. They need their parents reading to them. That is where the library is essential. So education, children, foundational learning is what the library supports. It supports lifelong learning. It supports developing your community, developing businesses, and it supports maintaining the mental and social health of your communities as well. That is what we are. That's the value of a library to its community. I should have just gone on one slide. I want to just say for school librarians, remember the Colorado studies, Keith Curry Lance and cohorts that were initially done in Colorado and then replicated almost without exception across the US. And every study since has shown there is a large, measurable difference in student achievement in schools that are supplied with a proper school library, staffed with a professional librarian, and the schools that are not. And particularly as we're seeing school librarians treated as inessential, non-essential luxuries, we need to understand. School librarians, you know this. A lot of your advocacy activities consist of educating your principals and superintendents to this appallingly little known fact that the largest difference you can make, the greatest difference you can make to achievement in schools is to provide a proper school library with a professional librarian. Every single study controlling for socioeconomic status, controlling for ethnicity, controlling for anything else you like, largest difference, school library, professional librarian. And also that applies equally to the public library. The public libraries are supporting learning and achievement in ways that we don't even realize, but we need to, and we need to be telling people that that in fact is what we're doing. So moving on. How are we doing this? How should we be doing this? I think we should be including advocacy messages in your social media. I don't think we use social media enough to tell people who we are and what we are doing. We are great at using social media for promoting our programs and for doing marketing, but I don't think we're doing enough of including that educational part in our advocacy message, in our social media outlets. Include advocacy in your marketing. Now, marketing and advocacy are similar, but not the same. And again, I think in the same way that I'm encouraging us to think about advocacy messages, and when I'm saying advocacy messages, I'm really saying, what is a library? What does a librarian do? And what is the value of the library to your community? I'm saying we can slip some of those as well into our marketing efforts. So we're not just promoting a program and assuming that everybody understands what the value of that program is or where it fits in, but we actually state it up front. Here is a program that helps you get a grip on personal finances, or that helps you understand, new parents. Let's have a program for new parents, how to read to your children, how to prepare your children for learning. But tell them up front, that's what we're doing. It's not just, here's a program for new parents, isn't this nice? Here's a program for new parents where you're going to learn to do this and you're going to help your child because we know children must hear live language. And perhaps the most important thing, you must get outside of your building. Now, if you're a one-person library, I know this is tricky. If you're a one-person school librarian, I know this is tricky. But you really need, we all need to be moving beyond the building. We need to be talking to users. And most importantly, we need to be talking to non-users. Why are users non-users? Well, I might suggest to you some of them simply do not need the resources of the library. They have access to information in other ways. But I think a far greater number of non-users of the library really do not understand what the library is or that it's free. They do not understand what a librarian could do for them, and they don't really have this understanding of the value the library is to their community. Again, I think a lot of librarians are shocked when people simply do not know that a library in America is free to join. And you can join at a fairly young age, get your own library card, and you can go to the library and get books, or you can read all day when there isn't a pandemic. We don't spend enough time telling people who we are and what we do. So on that line, do not assume. I know it's very natural and we all do it, but I'm going to remind you the majority of people, and included in that majority of people, I am putting a lot of your board members, a lot of your patrons, a lot of your non-professional library staff have no idea what a library really is. They have no idea what a librarian does or can do for them, and really have no idea of the value a library brings to its community. Lots of people think that a library is a good thing, and that's lovely, but they really can't tell you why it's a good thing. They can't give you specific examples. And I think that is what you must be able to do. You must be able to tell stories about a business that used the library to discover a competitive advantage, or a person that was able to use the library to overcome a particular situation or a particular disadvantage. Those stories help people understand, and you have them. They're out there, but very often we don't know them because we are shy and retiring, and we tend not to do that. We tend not to ask people. And admittedly, libraries have a very strong record of privacy. We don't ask you why you want this information. We don't ask you what you're looking at. We don't keep records on what you're looking at. So we tend not to know those stories. But I think, again, we need to find avenues for soliciting those stories, for encouraging people to share their success with us that was part of the library, so that we in turn can use those stories to educate people about what the library really is. Remember, libraries bring people and information together, but with no advertising or ulterior motives. There are plenty of other people, particularly online, who bring people and information together, but not without advertising or not without the desire to capture and exploit personal information. Libraries are unique. Librarians are highly trained information specialists. I love the search engines. They can do very good things for us, particularly as we are information professionals and know how to use them. But remember, 10 million hits is not a useful search result, particularly as, and the last time I checked on the major search engine, I think the first 3 pages of results had some monetary impact on the search engine provider. 3 pages of results were there because of money rather than accuracy or suitability of information. And then lastly, libraries support individuals and communities, and they foster growth and development of your community. And that is absolutely essential because we need to support our communities. We need to foster that growth and development. And the library is the place that can do that. And again, no advertising, no ulterior motives. We truly are there for the good of the community through the good graces of the community, whether that community be a public library community, whether it be a school library community or an academic or a special library community. We're there for that community, but we don't tell them often enough. So I think I've said this often enough to you. Again, there is no magic to this. It's not, there's no magic bullet. You simply have to get out and talk about the library to people. But the more you do, and the more you are able to educate people about what the library is, who a librarian is, and what the library does for its community, the better your community will understand, and the in time advocacy, and the much less work we will have to do in crisis advocacy mode. So it's overcoming our natural inhibitions and talking about the thing we love, the library, but talking in terms that people can understand, but also with no assumptions. We can't start assuming that everybody knows what the library is. Most people do not. So start at the beginning. What really is a library? What is our mission? And then who am I as a librarian? What can I do for you? And then how are we serving you as a community? And how can we improve? What else can we do for you? And so I'm now open for questions, I think. I will need to stop sharing my screen because otherwise I can't see the questions, the chat. I'm happy for you to ask questions, make comments, either right here, turn on your microphone. I think you should all be able to do that,
Yep,
and ask a question, or pop a question into the chat. And I'll be happy to tell you everything I know. And actually, Brandon, didn't you take the course?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so unfortunately, you're very much fitting into the category of we need to be reminded more often than we need to be instructed.
Hi.
Back.
Yes. Hi, Dr. Smith. Thank you for a wonderful and very insightful presentation. I do have a question, and I think it will be easier to ask this in person. I was curious, how do we draw this demarcation line? I mean, how do we know exactly when everyday advocacy stops and crisis advocacy starts, particularly if you're looking at a time of a protracted crisis of some sort, like we are dealing with right now with COVID-19 and everything that is accompanying this?
Okay, great question. When I'm talking about crisis advocacy, I'm really thinking not so much that we are living in a crisis, but then there is something that is about to happen imminently. So Congress is about to vote on defunding IMLS next Tuesday, and we all get the panicked emails, write everybody you know. And it's not that that is wrong or bad, but I can't help believing that if every congressperson, if every Senate representative was hearing, not just on legislative day, not just when there's a vital vote, but if they were hearing messages constantly about what their libraries are doing. Here's a story about recent immigrants and how the library helped them. Here's the story about people who lost their jobs in the COVID-19 epidemic and how the library was able to help them start a new business or start their own business. here is a story about something. If we had that information there already, it's a much easier proposition to say to folks, hey, remember, this is all the wonderful work libraries are doing. Don't defund IMLS. If we assume every senator and congressperson knows what a library is, what a librarian does, and the value it brings to our community, we are putting out advocacy messages that are basically, well, but the library is good, you ought to fund it. But they're saying, yeah, so what? I don't go to the library. Or everything's on Google. We're not starting from a foundation, a solid foundation. It's much, we need to create that solid foundation. And I think that's really where the difference is, that what I'm conceiving of as everyday advocacy is a constant education, telling people of who we are, what we do, and why we're valuable. Think about advertising. Think about the major soft drink brands in the US. They do not advertise only for the week before their quarterly sales figures are due. They advertise 24/7 in multiple arenas. We're librarians. We tend to be more retiring, perhaps a little more introverted, but we cannot be like that. We must be telling people more often. Long ago, I remember taking a marketing class in school, and after 16 weeks and an awful lot of thick reading, the professor on the final day said, always remember, the best form of marketing is word of mouth. Word of mouth. And so somebody telling you is going to have a lot more power and effect than simply a lot of bombardment with messages. I'm going to come back and say, remember, I think we are very, very mistaken when we think everybody understands libraries. And I don't even want to go into, it sort of annoys me slightly when people say, oh, this is not your grandmother's library, we're totally different. Well, yes, we are in some ways, but in other ways, we're totally the same. We are bringing people and information together. That's what libraries have always been about. It's what librarians are still about. So I'm not sure that the change message is really a particularly good one. But again, based on the fact that I think the majority of people have no idea what a library is. Stan, that was a very long answer to your question. Oh, but let me just say, we are in a crisis. I don't think of this as crisis advocacy. I think, yes, we have to be advocating all the time, but we're advocating in a crisis situation, a crisis world, if you like. So I wouldn't define this as crisis advocacy. I would characterize what we need to do at the moment as everyday advocacy. We're maybe using different examples because we can relate it to COVID-19 and the things we've had to do, the things we're not able to do. So it's a different context, but that I think is still my everyday advocacy.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks. Other questions? Things I've said that people think are absolutely outrageous. We're all being, I described myself as a sociable recluse. I think we're all being reclusive here. Or does someone have an instance they would like to share?
There is a nice comment in the chat. Did you see that?
From Dr. Dow,
Yes.
my wonderful and valued colleague. Persuasive advocacy can and should be done without emotions, but with, as you say, relevant details. What do you say? I think that's a very valuable point. And it sort of goes back to the beginning when I said so many of my students at the beginning of the advocacy course characterize advocacy as fighting and battling. And there's that sort of angry, why wouldn't you support libraries feeling? And we know that people are put off by very strong emotion and they're put off by belligerence. And I don't think we're librarians, and other than the library dragons of old who told us to shh and not to touch the books, we're not like that. We're not into conflict. We don't want to be marching with flaming torches to burn down City Hall if they say they're going to cut our library budget. So I think you can have conversations, and this is the whole point. If you're in a situation where the only option someone has is you must cut the library budget or you're laying off 6 staff workers, city staff workers, that's really not a good place to be. The point is you really don't ever want to get to that situation. How do you make sure the library isn't on the chopping block in that way? It's helping people understand right from the word go what the library is, what it's doing for people in the community, and the value it's bringing. I think, excuse me, the difficulty is, again, back to something I said earlier, we tend not to elicit stories from our patrons. We tend not to know about all the little successes or the little triumphs that people are having because of the library. And so we simply don't have that information when we need it. And the point is, we don't just need it when the library's on the cutting block. We need that information to be going out constantly. We need our friends of the library to know what the success stories are, so they're telling their neighbors. They need to know what the library is. They need to know what the latest program is and why it's important, so that they're talking it up. We just need a whole lot more conversation about the library, and the way to get that started is for us to talk about it. Now, we can begin to sound a little bit like cracked records. There we are, I'm dating myself a little. For you younger people, a repetitive person. But we must talk more about the library and what we're doing to people who are not walking through our doors. People who are not walking through our doors are voters too. It's their tax dollars too. And again, a lot of people who are not walking through your doors are not walking through their doors because they hate you. They're not walking through your doors because they have no clue what it is you offer, or that it's free, or that they've already paid for it, which is maybe slightly different. But we simply need to talk more. And the more we talk when there isn't a crisis, the less we have to talk when there is a crisis, and the more measured and reasonable we can be in a crisis, because we understand that the people we're talking to truly do understand who we are, what we are doing, and why we're here. Is that a good enough answer to your question, Dr. Dow?
I think so.
Okay. Thanks. We have a couple more minutes. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, we do. We have a couple more minutes, but what you said kind of reminds me of the idea that NPR does, National Public Radio. They do StoryCorps. Mm-hmm. So that would be a great programming idea for a public library, to do a little StoryCorps about what the library means to the patrons. So
sure, absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. But here's the deal: don't just do it on a Friday night in the library, and that's it. Find those people. Are they willing to be videoed? Are they willing to
Yeah.
have their story written down? Can you post it online? Can you send a wonderful success story to your city commission? What are we doing constantly to be in people's minds that we are the library and we are doing something wonderful for every single person in the community who wants to walk through the door? Frankly, every single person in the state of Kansas. Emporia Public Library's library card policy is we'll give a card to any Kansas resident, period. So
That's
it's not
great.
even confined to our community. Now, how many people in Junction City are members of the Emporia Public Library? I don't know. Wonderful if you are, happy to have you. But the point is we need to think outside the building. Not because we're bad and wicked, not because we're bad and wicked. We're not doing things wrong. We are just not doing more things that let other people understand who we are and why we're here. And we have so much to offer. So you need to move aside the recluse part of your personality, move into your social side of your personality, and go out and talk to people. And you don't have to talk to people for an hour. You can simply say, have a 30-second conversation. Great thing going on at the library. We're doing this wonderful new program that's helping people X read to their children. Oh, I hadn't even thought about that. Or something similar. We've got a great new resource at the library. We've just acquired the such and such database. You can find out, you can get your Carfax things, you can get Kelly Blue Book values, whatnot. Even just those little messages, it's little messages all the time.
Well, great. Well, I don't see any more questions in the chat, but thank you for a very enlightening presentation. I mean, it always, public libraries were kind of where I got my start. So it's always nice to hear different people talk about ways to advocate. So.
Well, thank you so much. It's my pleasure. My email is on the presentation. The presentation is uploaded for you. If there's anything you want to know, if there's anything you want to say, please let me know. Happy to help. And also, Slim is here, happy to help. So don't forget that we're here, the School of Library and Information Management, as a resource for you as well. So if you're looking for something, if you're looking for training for your board members or something, there are lots of wonderful resources already in Kansas and elsewhere. But if you need Slim, contact Slim. We're here. We're part of your community too. So ask. You'll be surprised what we can do. And thanks so much, Margie. And
Yeah,
thanks
sure.
everyone for
Yeah,
coming.
I think I'll see you all later. Yeah. Well, I have a conflict later, but I'll see you later, I'm sure.
Okay,
All right. Well, I'm
thanks.
going to stop the recording now.
Okay.